Hello, welcome back. This is where we left off in the previous video for making the Earth. What I want is to rotate this Earth about its axis. Something more like this. Where the Y is angled by 23.4 degrees and the Earth continuously rotates. Now we're not going to be able to do all this in Blender. I mean, we could, but it's easier to do one complete revolution and then have that cycle in a different program. But that's what we're after. Alright, so I don't need the moon. So as sad as it is, let's save it. And let's get rid of our moon. And save it again. Save as. And let's call this Earth 2 by hitting that little plus button. That way every time we save it, we're good. Alright, so making a little correction to the atmosphere, making it a little bit bluer, and perhaps a little bit less transparent. Yeah. Everything here is not about materials at all, except for one thing. Go ahead and take it out of camera view mode and stop tracking that. What I want to do is add the axis. So I'm going to hit Shift A, and the closest thing to what I want is a cylinder. And it's entirely too big. So I want to scale it such that it really just goes through the Z axis. So I want to scale it along the X and Y, but not Z. To do that, S, Shift Z, and then just make it as big as you want. And notice it's just doing the X and Y. And make it a little bit bigger. There. It's not quite big enough. I don't want it in my Earth. I won't be able to see it. So I need to scale it by the Z to make it a little bit bigger. So S, Z, and I'm going to hold down the control button just so that it doesn't go wild. And that's good for me. I want to be able to see it no matter what, and because it's white, it's not really visible most of the time. So I'm going to add a material, new, and the only thing I'm really going to do is add an emission of whatever color you want. Doesn't really matter. Just so that we can see it. Alright, having done that, I want to join all of these, but because I added a material to that, let's label it. I want to use everything as a whole. Maybe that's not what you want to do. I don't want to rotate the clouds separately from the Earth because in the grander scheme of things, it's not going to matter that much. So to do this and to make everything easier, I'm going to come up here to Filter, hit this little arrow, and I'm going to click the arrow in front of camera to make it unselectable, and in front of the light to make it unselectable. Rename my cylinder and make it Earth axis. And now I'm just going to drag over everything because the light and the camera aren't selectable. And I'm going to hit Control J, which makes the Earth one complete unit. Alright, so we have two separate problems. Rotating, in this case by the Y, which is to get the axis to turn 23.4 degrees. The other problem we're going to have is rotating the Earth. So if I, let me move it away from the center. if I rotated the Z, let's bring up our keyframes, go back to 0 in the keyframe section, hit I, rotation, that makes a keyframe for where we are. And if I go over some distance like 120 and hit R, Z, 360, enter, added a keyframe by hitting I, rotation, go back to the beginning and hit play, it'll rotate fairly well. Let's go back to our 0. Now let's rotate our Y by 23.4 degrees and do it again. We've got a different problem. It's not doing it. So let's go back here and change our keyframe, R, Y, 23.4 degrees, enter. And let's just hit our keyframe there, I, rotation. Go over here to 120 and let's update that. So RY 23.4 degrees, RZ, even if we did Z to put it along the local axis, 360 degrees, enter, add a keyframe, and go back to the beginning. Let's see how this plays. And our axis rotates. We don't want that at all. That axis needs to stay in the same position just like that while rotating in the Z direction. So we need a new strategy. Just making sure the keyframes are cleared out. One of the things you can do is, instead of using the XYZ Euler, you can use the quaternion. Some of these other ones will work too, but I know that that definitely works. So we do the same thing here. Click on our object, R, Y, 23.4 degrees, and the quaternion ruler is weird in that if you go from 0 to 360, 360 is also the equivalent of 0. So instead of taking the longer path of 0 to 360, it'll say, okay, you want to go from 0 to 0, the shortest distance from where you are to where you're going, and it will do that. So you have to actually add in additional keyframes as you go. So we'll do our keyframe here for rotation, and then every 90 degrees we'll rotate along the local Z. So hit Z for world, then Z again for the local, 90, enter, add your keyframe, I, rotation, and then just every about 30 we'll go 90 degrees, 30 keyframes, 90 degrees. So rotate Z, Z, 90, enter, add a keyframe. This is just a lot of work. It's so not worth it. Rotate Z, world axis, Z again, local axis, 90 degrees, enter, add a keyframe, and at the 120 we'll rotate our last one, our Z, world, then Z again for local, 90, enter, add your keyframe, which is something you always forget, or at least I do. And let's change this endpoint to 120 and play. So the axis is not moving, but the Earth is rotating. So this is an option for our particular problem, but as we've noted, this is a major pain. Alright, so I'm going to go back to the beginning And I'm going to clear all these keyframes out. Remove this rotation. Go back to the standard ruler and try again. At this point, our organization is going to have to be super organized. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use empties to control the spin and leave the material alone. So I'm going to relabel our Earth because it labeled it as the object that we were in. Just making it Earth. And now with my Earth selected, I am going to hit Shift S. And I'm going to put cursor to active. That moves the cursor from the world origin to the center of the object. And from here, I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to add an empty. One for the Y, and I'm going to add another one for the Z. The rotation. So Shift A, empty, plane. I'm going to label the first one rotation, Earth. Actually, I'm going to label it Earth rotation Z for the Z axis. And I'm going to label the other one Earth rotation Y for the axis. Now I want to do child-parent relationships. So I'm going to click the child first, the parent second. The child is going to be Earth, and I'm going to hit Control Z. I always like to do the Z first. And from here you can just hit Control P or just right click, Parent, Object. That's going to be our rotation in the 360 around the axis. Then the next thing I want to do is I want to make Z the child of Y the parent. So I don't want to select the Earth. I'm going to select just the rotation Z and then Control click rotation Y and do the same thing, parent, object. And so we got this drop down menu that contains everything from the materials, which that one's not labeled and it should be. It would have to be the atmosphere. And you can change any of those values at any time you want. But we're dealing with rotations right now, so let's focus on those. Go ahead and save what we got. And with our first one, let's add an animation. We're here at the 0 spot. We have 0 rotation. So let's do what we did the very first time around. Put our keyframe in for rotation. And then somewhere along the line, let's do every 30. Let's just make it rotate completely all the way around. R, Z, 360, enter, add your keyframe, hit I, rotation, and let's back it up and see what's going on here. Well, not like that. Let's go a little bit slower. And you can see that it is rotating along the Z axis. Let's back it up a little bit so you can see landmass. And there we have it. We want this to go for forever, so one of the things you may not be able to see is that it's slow to start, it speeds up, and then it slows back down. And if we look at the graphics editor, hit home, you can kind of see slow to start, speeding up, slows down toward the end. We can fix that by hitting T and going to linear. And the other problem we have is when we get to 30, it doesn't work anymore. We want it to go forever. We don't want to have to control every single thing about the rotation of the Earth. So the way that we can get around doing this is in the graphics editor, select just this point. So if I zoom out, this one's now non-selected. Select just this point, hit N on the keyboard. That brings up this other menu. Hit modifiers, add modifier, cycles. We don't want that. What we want is one straight line going straight up for forever. So repeat before, no cycles, and in the repeat after, we want that to be repeat with offset, so that it goes on and on and on and on and on forever. So let's go back to this and take a peek at what we've done. And you can tell, even though we don't have any keyframes here, it's still going. Awesome. Well, what about that problem with Y? Well, that's where we use our other empty, and we hit R Y 23.4, enter. Don't need to use any keyframes. It'll just stay that way. And we're done. It does not move, which is awesome. That's what we want. So the great thing about this is at any point in time you can decide, I don't want that keyframe there, I want it here. And you can tell it's definitely slower. I'm going to leave it there at the 30. Doesn't really matter. So the next thing to do would be to render this. I'm in cycles. I'm only going to render this at 32. Although I gotta tell you that this axis right here is going to cause me some noise problems, some color noise. I could, if I wanted to, go down to this right here, which is View Layer Properties. Go all the way to the bottom and click denoising. But if I did that, it's going to add some to my render time, and I really just want to get it done. The next thing we probably need to consider is here in our output properties, how we're going to do it. I only need 30 frames. So that needs to be set down to 30. Frame rate, I'm good with 30 frames per second. That way I only have to render 30 frames and not 240 or whatever. I can just get it done in a matter of 15-20 minutes and get on with life. The next thing is PNG isn't going to cut it. We need a video. I like the MPEG videos, and in the encoding I'm going to bring that down to MPEG 4. You can choose whatever quality or encoding speed you want. That's completely up to you. Do some trials. The next thing is to where to put it. So let me add a folder and let me label it Earth Rotates Single Loop. As you can tell, I've already done this a few times. Hit accept. Nope. It went away. Single loop. Double click into that. Earth rotates single loop. Hit accept. And make sure it's showing up over here, because if you don't, it could potentially overwrite something else that you've got going on. And from there, you just need to render the animation. But you need to make sure that your camera's set up, and mine is not. So, or at least not well. So make some adjustments. I'm also going to move this light, it's non-selectable, to 000, item, location, and I'm going to move my Earth a little bit further away from that light. So let's move this over a little bit, all of it. We've only keyframed our rotation. We did not keyframe the location. So we're allowed to do this. Just make sure you select everything. Because sometimes the empties just will not go with it. That's good for me. Let's make this a little bit brighter, maybe a little bit bigger. A little bit bigger than that. And bright. Move it over a little bit, just so that we can see more of the lip part. Control Alt number pad 0. Move it to fit where we want. Maybe make it a little bit smaller. Now we're not going to actually see the light, but we'll see the effects of the light. So now is the time to hit render animation. And we'll zoom through this. Alright, it appears to be done. So let's take a look at our results. And as you can tell, even though we rendered it in a transparent fashion, it chose a black background for us. So if you don't want Blender choosing your background, then you need to uncheck transparency under that film setting and choose your own background. But it looks like it worked correctly. We've got our axis that is rotating, or our axis that is maintaining its same angle, and the Earth is rotating about it. But if you go to play this in real life, it looks a little bit different. Let's take a look at that. Alright, so this is the video in full as it was saved. 1 second, it's done. So how do we get it to do that in perpetuity? And the answer to that, what I found useful, is a VSDC editor. You can get the free video editor from videosoftdev.com. It's been around for forever. And just choose whichever one you want. Mine is in X64. You download that and open it. So now that we're in the VSDC editor, it is free. Just click off of this. It's always going to want you to upgrade, and maybe you should, depending on what you need. I'm going to close that out. I don't want to update right now. And import content. Migrate to wherever you put it. Earth revolves single loop. Open that. And it gives you this menu. Let's rename this. See if we can get it to go for 2 minutes. I'm going to leave the rest of this alone. And hit finish. It's a lot of complicated stuff going on, but we don't really need everything. The only thing we really need is to go over here and under loop mode, there's a drop down menu, hit loop video, and then we just need to figure out how far we need to make it go in order to get the time that we want. We know that 30 frames takes 1 second. There's 60 seconds in a minute. We want it to run for 2. So it would be 120 times 30, which is 360, and you can see 2 minutes worth of video. So let's play that. And look, it's going for more than a second. So I'm going to hit stop, and at this point I want to export my project. And the only thing I really care about here is, let's go with PC. I want to do MPEG 4. Make sure everything here is what you want, and just hit export project. It will always tell you you need hardware acceleration. Maybe you do, but try it without it and see how that goes. Alright, now it's complete. Let's take a look at how it went. And here we go. And excellent. If you found any part of this video useful, hit like or subscribe. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever. The next thing we need to do is make this Earth revolve. So we're rotating now. We need it to revolve. So hit me up with the next video. Have a good day.